her seat.
Well, the seat she is going to be leaving now that she got elected to the 2nd district. I'd like to thank some of the candidates that ran in this election that showed up tonight. Amy Solaris and Elaine Sessions. You should have won, and it didn't happen. Thanks to the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Okay, so now I'd like to introduce our, and I also like to welcome our elected official, Virginia Dare Soil and Water Conservation Director, Ms. Leslie Jones. When do you run for re-election?
I apply next year, so sometime next November, yeah.
Oh, okay, all right.
If y'all still want me.
Of course, we love you. Anyway, I'd like to introduce E.W. Jackson, who was born in Chester, Pennsylvania. He joined the United States Marine Corps, and if you didn't know, today is the Marine Corps birthday. He was honorably discharged in 1973 and went on to graduate summa cum laude and Phi Beta Kappa from the University of Massachusetts at Boston in 75, from Harvard Law School in 78. While in law school, he studied at Harvard Divinity School and was licensed as a bishop minister. He was ordained as a pastor in 1979 and consecrated as bishop in 1998. He pastored a church and practiced law for 15 years in Boston and was an adjunct professor at Northeastern University and Strayer University. He is the founder of the Cold Church, headquartered in Chesapeake, Virginia, and S.T.A.N.D, which stands for Staying True to America's National Destiny, a national nonprofit organization with a mission to bring Americans together across racial and cultural lines to preserve our Judeo-Christian values and heritage. Through his church, he and his wife, Theodora, founded the Chesapeake Martin Luther King Leadership Breakfast and the William Jackson Youth Center. He is the host of The Awakening, a national radio talk show on American Family Radio with 200 radio stations and live streamed around the world. He is the author of 2 books, 10 Commandments to an Extraordinary Life and 12 Principles to Make Your Life Extraordinary. He has been guest on Fox and Friends, The O'Reilly Factor, Neil Caputo, Lou Dobbs, Megyn Kelly, CBN World News, ABC's Good Morning America, C-SPAN's Washington Journal, ABC Radio Network, National Public Radio, and other media. His articles have been featured in the Washington Times, American Thinker, Western Journal, American Family Association magazine, The Stand, Life's Today, The Stream, and other publications. Bishop Jackson has been a candidate for the U.S. Senate and the Republican nominee for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, and wouldn't we all be better off if he had gotten elected along with Cuccinelli and Olson? Bishop Jackson has been a candidate, I said that. He and his wife Theodora have been married for 50 years, have 3 children, and reside in Suffolk, Virginia. Can we have a big round of applause for Bishop Jackson?
Well, thank you for inviting me. You don't have to read this biography. I think most of the people in this room probably know me or know enough about me that you recognize my face, and I'm really just happy to be here. I would correct you on one thing. My wife is with me tonight. She doesn't get to run around with me very much, but she's here tonight. She found out I was coming and said, well, you know, let me go with you. I said, absolutely. We've been married for 52 years, actually. 52 years. Well, let's see. Oh, and yes, you read. I went to Harvard Law School. I graduated from Harvard Law School. I didn't drink the Kool-Aid, folks. Believe me. Because you know, Harvard came out with this. Let's not call them pregnant women. Let's call them birthing persons. So sometimes I'm almost ashamed to say I went to a school that thinks like that. But
it wasn't the same school back then.
Oh my goodness gracious, man. And look, I want to thank Ken, my good friend, because I sat down, my wife sat down, and he reached over to push my wife's chair, and I said, thanks for making me embarrassed. Ken is a great gentleman, And I want to congratulate you candidates who ran great races and didn't quite make it. I want to encourage you, don't quit, don't give up. And I want to thank all of you because I see a lot of familiar faces here today, and I'm glad that you all haven't quit either, that you're still in it. I ran 3 times, didn't win any of those times. People ask me, are you ever going to run again? I said, well, I might have one race left in me. Then I look at my wife and I say, well, maybe not. But I'm certainly never going to quit. But my organization, S.T.A.N.D, is a nonprofit organization, but we also have a sister super PAC. Our super PAC ran over 1,000 ads, primarily in black precincts, trying to convince our black citizens to stop voting for these crazy Democrats and start voting for conservatives because their values are mainly conservative. And we think, frankly, we helped Herschel Walker. He's not over the line yet, but we helped him because we were the only ones doing it. And of course, I'm disappointed at the outcome. I was expecting something very, very different. But it's taught me one important lesson, or reaffirmed one important lesson. Bob, you'll get this. Never underestimate the ability of Republicans to snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory. Yeah, it amazes you. Well, look, so let me share my reflections. Do you want me to take some questions or comments and respond to things? If you all want me to do that, I'll be happy to do that.
Oh, yeah.
I think that my notes said I had 45 minutes, but I never talk longer than 3 hours anyway. But I'm not going to talk that long. But let me share a couple of thoughts I have, because I have been traveling around the country helping candidates, and we've invested a lot trying to help candidates. We advertised in Pennsylvania, obviously here in Virginia, in the 2nd District and the 7th, in North Carolina, in Georgia, and in Ohio, trying to help our Senate candidates. We tried to help Sandy Smith down in North Carolina, a great conservative who really should have won. And my understanding is that she didn't, in part because the Republican Party simply didn't get behind her there, and they should have. And look, there are a number of things that strike me that we all have to remember, particularly given the outcome we've seen. Number one is we always have to remember that we as conservatives are not simply running against our opposing candidate. We're running against the whole current of the culture. I mean, the mainstream media is against us. They're against our views. The colleges and universities that often help turn out students to vote are against us. The journalism profession is against us. Obviously, the corporate world is against us. All of these forces of the culture are working against us. So when we run, we have to remember we're not just running against our opposing candidate. We're running against the whole current of the culture, which means that we've got to be prepared to do some things that other candidates might not have to do. And we're going to have to be prepared to work harder. I mean, we've got to have a get out the vote campaign because they got it built in. And all of these elements helping them to turn their vote out. So we've got to be prepared to turn our vote out. And I think that's one of the areas where some argue that we failed. We didn't get the job done that we should have gotten done. And Mitch McConnell, if he had spent that $32 million that he spent in Ohio, spread it around a little bit, we might have picked up some additional seats, but he decided to dump it all there. And to ignore some other candidates, of course, Bolduc in New Hampshire and some other candidates that he could have helped, but he decided that he was simply not going to weigh in on those races. I don't know because whether it's personal animosity against former President Trump or exactly what his problem was, but most people agree that the money was not well spent. Well, in the meantime, the Democrats are going all out for their candidates in every way. I mean, we were outspent in most races.
Oh, yeah.
And we were certainly out-organized. We're almost always out-organized in some races. I mean, some people are arguing, and I think we've got to look at it. I don't like early voting. You all may have a different view. I don't like it. I like voting on election day. I think we are less susceptible to cheating and fraud. But the rules are changing. we've got to start turning our vote out as early as we can. Get as many people lined up to vote at the earliest possible moment. Make our job easier when election day comes. Because often we start with a deficit on election day because they often, some of these races have hundreds of thousands of votes that are already in the bag by the time we get to election day. So we're fighting a whole series of forces beyond just the campaign, and we always have to remember that. The other thing, I said the Republican Party is able to snatch defeat out of the jaws of victory. For whatever reason, Republicans seem reticent to respond to the moment. You know, this is one of the things I just love about Donald Trump, and some people will say maybe he responds too quickly sometimes, but he never fails to respond to the moment. He doesn't let things get by. And so, for example, I think the Republicans really sat on their hands when the whole abortion issue was being raised. They did not respond to it, and they kind of thought, well, it's not really an issue. The polls don't show it to be an issue. Well, it's not an issue that's going to change most people's minds, but it's an issue that could motivate people to get out and vote who might not have been otherwise inclined. And think about it. We never answered that. You know, the code language for stopping abortion was they're going to destroy our democracy. That's really what they were getting at. They were talking about taking away from their people the right to kill unborn babies. That's really what they were getting at. And for them, that's the end of democracy. You know, it wasn't the end of democracy when you couldn't choose whether or not you wanted to get a vaccine or a shot that they called a vaccine. That was fine. And it wasn't the end of democracy when they told you you had to wear a mask and you had to stay in and you couldn't go out and you know, all these things, these mandates they put on us. Remember in Kentucky, they were actually going around to church parking lots, writing down license plate numbers and sending people $500 citations for daring to go to church. Now, no problem with that. But when it comes to abortion, which is, from my perspective, dealing with a human being like you and I, who went through that stage, that is not yet born, is not trying to destroy democracy or taking away people's choice. What we're trying to do is save a life. That's what we're trying to do. But instead of Republicans responding by saying, well, wait a minute. Yeah, we are against the extremism of the left that believes that you can kill an unborn baby up to the moment of death, up to the moment of birth. Yeah. We are against the extremism that says if a child is intended to be aborted and that child is born alive, you can let the child die.
Yes.
I mean, that's extremism. We allow ourselves to be painted as extremists, but the reality is we are not the extremists. I mean, I think back on my political involvement and career, and you know, my views on most things haven't changed over the last 40 years. But suddenly, I'm defined as an extremist. You know, I believe that marriage was a union between one man and one woman. Wow, what a weird, where'd you get a weird idea like that? Well, now I'm an extremist for believing that. You know, when my son was born, I held him up. It's a boy. Oh no, that's an extreme position. You can't say that. That's, what right do you have to say that? Because all you're doing is guessing. No, I don't think I'm guessing. I think it's pretty clear. But think of how we have been defined as extremists. Oh, and by the way, and I actually revere the Constitution of the United States and believe that it should be adhered to. That's an extremist position now. I actually believe that the First Amendment is virtually absolute. That's an extreme position now. What I just described to you in terms of my views on family, my views on life, that's considered hate speech now. Hatred of women, if you believe in life. Hatred of homosexuals and transgenders, and I'm a Christian. I don't hate anybody. I really don't. I really don't. I can disagree with people without hating them, without wanting to hurt them, without having animosity toward them, but we are painted as extremists. Well, you've got to respond to that stuff. You know, I heard Rob Portman on the way over here on Brett Baer saying the people decided that they didn't want either extreme. Well, I'm thinking to myself, well, wait a minute, how are we extreme? What is it, what positions do we hold that are extreme? I mean, we believe in the rule of law. We believe that our borders as a sovereign nation should be closed to those who don't come the proper way. How is that extreme? It's the left who believes the borders ought to be open. Let anybody come in who wants to come in. They believe, obviously, in lawlessness with regard to crime, where no matter what people do, just turn them back out on the street. Because Karl Marx, as you all probably know, believed that there should be no such thing as prisons. You shouldn't put people in prison. And since the Democrat Party really has become a Marxist party, they really believe the same thing now. That social justice demands that you not put people in jail for things that they do. Maybe, in the most heinous cases. But even that Fetterman, who just got elected in Pennsylvania, said the first thing he wants to do is let all of the people who got life without parole out. I mean, so... And I'm an extremist for believing that crime ought to be properly punished. So when we don't respond to this stuff, we leave ourselves open. And of course, you all know the exit polls show, number one, a lot of women went to the polls and voted strictly on the issue of abortion. And it wasn't even really addressed. And secondly, and this one really throws me for a loop, a lot of people went to the polls and voted because they thought our democracy was under threat. And I think, well, what does that even mean?
Nothing.
It doesn't mean anything. It's just a way of getting people stirred up emotionally so that they will go out and vote against those bad conservatives and Republicans who want to take away your democracy. And that wasn't really addressed either. You think about it, I can't think of a single Republican or candidate who actually said, wait a minute, let's talk about what they mean by that. See, because I'm convinced what they really were talking about was the end of the Democrat Party. They were afraid that they were about to take such a terrible beating that they might not be able to recover from it. And so really it's them and their political interests that are at stake, not the interests of the country. And besides that, you all will appreciate this. I know a lot of people wouldn't. But we're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. Yeah. So we've got to get more nimble at responding. I'll say one other thing, and then I'll open it up for your comments and your questions. There's a lot to be encouraged by in spite of how bad this worked out. One of the things we can be encouraged by is the fact that there is a shift taking place in the Hispanic and the black community who are now beginning to vote conservative because they're realizing that the Democrat Party does not have their interests at heart. Now, it's happening more slowly in the black community than in the Hispanic community. The Hispanic community now, Democrats are leading with Hispanic voters by only 5% now. And just a few years ago, it was like 30% or so. So something really, really good is happening there. And I think that portends well for the future. Because I've always said, you know, these ethnic communities are people of faith and family. And most of them go to church. Most of them believe in hard work. But the Democrats have convinced them that Republicans and conservatives are against them because of the color of their skin or their ethnic background. And they've sold that lie repeatedly. And here again, I don't see a whole lot of effort by the party itself to respond to that and to call it out for the lie that it is. I mean, you all remember when George Bush was running, they actually ran ads in the black community saying, George Bush wants to put you back in slavery. How crazy does it get? But this is the kind of thing they say, and often Republicans think, well, that's too stupid, I'm not even going to respond to that. But remember, they've got a propaganda machine that's working over time. It's not just working when campaigns are ongoing. It's working between times. They're out there, they're organizing, they're talking to people. You know, these folks are Marxists, and they believe in community organizing. We ought to know that. We had a president who was one, right? Wasn't much else, but he was that. So we have got to take advantage of that. That's why my PAC is we're going to be doing ads in Georgia again between now and December 6th. In fact, I'm hoping to get down to Georgia and do a rally down there, because what I'm finding is that when I can get into these places and talk to folks, and bring them a message that they likely are not going to hear in their churches or among the black office holders, the people they look to for leadership, they respond to it because they know it's true. I was just in Chicago about a month ago and held a conference in Chicago about the violence that is taking place there, which Lori Lightweight is doing. I mean, oh goodness gracious! It's just a travesty to have that woman as mayor. I don't know why anybody voted for her. I do not know. But we were there talking about the issue of violence and talking about better relationships with police officers as opposed to vilification of cops. Talking about educational choice, parents having a choice in education, and talking about rebuilding the black family from the decimation that the liberals have created for it since 1965 when Lyndon Johnson started the Great Society program. And folks, it is undeniable. In 1950, only 13% of black children were born out of wedlock in 1950. And 1965, it increased a little bit because of the urbanization, because of course most Americans of African ancestry came up from the South, and as they began to urbanize, that destabilized things a little bit, but still, then overwhelmingly 80% stillborn into two-parent monogamous families. And you hit 1965 and you watch the family go down. As the welfare program rose, the family decimated, and by the way, as the family declined, guess what increased? Crime. I mean, it's undeniable. And when people hear this message, they gravitate to it. When I remind them that the Democrat Party was the party of slavery, the Democrat Party was the party of segregation, the Democrat Party was the party of the Ku Klux Klan. Because they've never heard that before. They want us to leap all the way back to the founding fathers and tear down their statues and say, well, let's not go back that far. Let's go back a little less far than that and talk about Woodrow Wilson, Democrat, who resurrected the Ku Klux Klan and resegregated the federal government employees. So when you talk to people about these issues, it resonates with them. They understand it. They get it. But it's just not enough of it. So I'm committed to doubling down on it and trying to do more in the next 2 years as we move toward a presidential campaign. Which seems to have already begun. Woo, already, yeah. I don't know whether you all heard about the memo that President Trump just put out about DeSantis, but woo, yeah, starting already. But at any rate, to do that even more, because in spite of the fact that we didn't get the kind of victory we wanted, I think we will take the House, and it's still possible, by the way, that we will take the Senate. Because Nevada and Arizona and Georgia, I think there's a good chance with Kemp's help and with others weighing in. I think there's going to be a lot of resources poured into that race, obviously, and Raphael Warnock will have a lot too. But I think there's a good chance that Herschel Walker will pull out a victory in Georgia, and we'll bring Georgia back into our column. We definitely need to. Well, listen, and then I'll close with this. No matter what, we don't quit. No matter what, we just don't quit. Because look, they're fighting for power and control, and frankly, I don't know whether you're talking about Harvard, Columbia, Georgetown, they got professors writing articles now about how the Constitution is antiquated and should be ignored. Yes. I mean, prestigious professors telling us that we will be better off, our democracy will be better off if we simply ignore the Constitution of the United States, because after all, it's a document written by racists, and it's so they're fighting for power and control and the fundamental transformation of our country. We're fighting for its preservation. We're fighting for the preservation of liberty, of prosperity, of opportunity, of hope. My wife and I just, 8 months now? 8 months ago, is she 8 months? Just had our first granddaughter. Don't get me started, I'll talk another 2 hours. But do I have any pictures? How many would you like to see? But you know, what kind of country is she going to grow up in? And for me, that's what, I mean, I was going to fight before, but now even more, I look at her picture and I think to myself, is she going to grow up in a country where she's told, you might not know what your gender is, but you know, because
We'll help you.
is she going to grow up in a country where she's told, oh, you believe in God? You're a Christian, that makes you an oppressor. She's going to grow up in a country where she's told, oh, you're black? Oh, well, you know, you're a victim. You know, you can't make it. Because America's a racist, white supremacist country. I don't want that for her. Do you? Want it for your grandchildren? No, we want them to experience the America that we know and love. We're not, I tell people all the time, I know we're not a perfect country because we're here. And we're not perfect. So we'll never be a perfect country. So if you compare us to heaven, yeah, we fall short. But if you compare us to any other nation that exists on the face of the earth or has ever existed, there's no place like it. This is the greatest place on earth for anybody to live and grow and work and build a family and a business and create a life. I've just written a new book. It's not out yet. It'll be out early next year, called Sweet Land of Liberty, Reflections of a Patriot Descended from Slaves. And I tell people all the time, I don't care how my ancestors got here. I'm just glad they got here. Because they got here, I'm here. And even though they could not see the opportunity, the fulfillment that I would experience in this country, because that's not what they experienced, I really believe God had a plan. And I believe that the founding fathers saw something beyond where we were at that point and knew that this nation would grow to be much, much more because it was rooted on the right foundations. Folks, look, when I took that oath to the Constitution of the United States as a Marine, I say I did it out of a sense of duty then, but I do it out of a sense of love and affection now because I know the blessing of being an American. And I'm not letting a bunch of crazy leftists take that away from us. So I've said, and I know, Ken, you'll agree with me. I know all of you will. That if I have to be the last person in this nation standing up for that flag, the last person standing up for our Constitution, and the Judeo-Christian values upon which it's based, that our rights and liberties don't come from mankind, they come from God. Amen. I'll do it until I breathe my final breath. But I'm never giving up, I'm never giving in, I'm never backing down. And I tell you all, you stand up, you step up, you speak up, you refuse to back up, because we cannot be defeated if we will not quit. Because we are on God's side. I'll stop there.
What can we do within local parties and stuff to get out people that don't have the mentality, no, we're not going to stop, we're going to keep going, you know, we're not going to let things affect us, we're just going to keep going, because I see a lot of, oh, well, it's a done deal, oh, with it, you know, they throw up and then quit.
You know, it's not an easy, there's no easy answer to that. I remember when I ran for lieutenant governor and would be out knocking on doors, and I'd come across Second Amendment enthusiasts who would say, I don't vote. And I'd say, you don't vote?
That's crazy.
Why not? Because it doesn't make any difference. I said, well, do you believe in the First Amendment and the right to exercise it? Do you realize the people who could get elected want to take that away from you and you don't vote? So I persuaded some. I would run into Christians, same deal. Oh, I'm active in my church. Oh, I don't get involved in that. Well, do you realize your First Amendment liberty is at stake? That there are people who really want to rob you of that? And there are, let's face it. But you know what we do? We keep telling them. We keep talking to them. Look, my wife and I have family members, and some of them are conservative, like us. Some of them, we're just praying for them. But we never quit. We are always reminding them of these issues. Because, you know, you just have to keep talking to people until one day, I know in my church I used to say to people, I know some of you probably don't like what I'm about to say because you think I'm being political. And then I would say to them, But the day is going to come when you have a child who goes to a school and comes home and tells you that the teacher told them some crazy cockamamie nonsense that is against everything you believe. I said, and then maybe you'll appreciate the fact that I stood up. And you know what? It's happening. So we just have to keep at it. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you for coming out and speaking to us. You did bring up abortion, and I'd like to hear your take on this. After Roe v. Wade was
Overturned, yeah.
rescinded, yes, one of our senators, and you believe in states' rights and states running specific things, why would Senator Lindsey Graham come out with a federal law bill to, I mean, it was unnecessary, and I think it had a lot to do with why people rose up and got mad and came out and voted about abortion, and he should never have done that. So I want to hear your take on what you think happened.
Well, there's a bigger question. Why does Lindsey Graham do a lot of stuff that he's, you know, sometimes he can be so on point, and other times you think, what in the world? He can be so off the wall. I don't know why he did that. Maybe he thought that was going to endear him to the people of South Carolina. I don't know. But it was, you're right, it was a bonehead move. And I hope he didn't do it to stir them up. But yeah, it's just stupid. Right. And see, that's the other thing. Republicans have got to explain to people, whether you're pro-life or you're pro-abortion, overturning Roe v. Wade did not outlaw abortion. It simply returned it to where it belonged. There was never, there was never any constitutional right to kill an unborn baby. It just didn't exist. That Supreme Court made it up, and it was finally corrected, and now it goes back to where it belongs, to the states and the people under the 10th Amendment.
Yes.
But the Republicans don't say anything about it.
But, and listen, you want me to tear my hair out in front of you? Because I don't know why they will not address these issues in a forthright way that people can rally to and say, yes, exactly.
Okay, I could ask you a number of substantive questions, but I want to sort of frame a funny story that I want you to respond to.
Okay.
All right, so like 100 years ago, H.L. Mencken said words to the effect that the common man would be so empowered at some point that eventually the White House would be adorned with a moron. Right. Now, I don't call him a moron, I call him a failing, doddering old fool. But,
Right. Well, that's bad.
but imagine the power of the Democrat Party. And I'm not going to say anything that isn't true. In Pennsylvania, they elected a senator who is a brain-damaged communist who wants to ruin their economy. How is it possible that that force of titanic power could be raised to elect a brain-damaged communist as senator from the state of Pennsylvania? Can't talk straight. Tell me something about that.
Well, look,
Because they're dead.
here again, that's psychological, it's spiritual, but I will say this, because I've asked this question about California. What happened to the California that elected Ronald Reagan?
Well, at least they're not brain damaged. They can put together some words.
Well, I guess there are different kinds of brain
We're
damage
actually
then.
talking about
Right.
Fetterman being a presidential candidate now because he appears so well for his brain.
Because I'm convinced of this. Gavin Newsom is definitely brain damaged, but he can, you know. But look, here's my point. Remember what I said earlier about the forces of the culture? I really believe that California is a one-party state because it has one of the most extensive college and university systems, and it's all under political control. In other words, they have a built-in indoctrination system. And you just churn people out of that believing the same far-left garbage that their leaders, their political leaders believe. And I think Pennsylvania is getting close to that. I grew up in Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania was a conservative state. But they've got a pretty extensive public college system. University of Pennsylvania, I went to one, Indiana University of Pennsylvania. They've got them all over the state. And if you're churning out people who are indoctrinated to believe like Fetterman believes, and he looks normal to you, well then, the fact that he can't string two words together is irrelevant, because after all, he'll give us the equivalent of Fidel Castro when he gets in office. Yeah, I mean, so, but look, you're right, but I think that's part of it. We've created these indoctrination systems, and look, I just saw a poll today. 63% of Gen Z, ages 18 to 30, 63% voted Democrat. They turned them out and they all voted Democrat. Because they're all products of the same system.
18 to 30, did you say?
18 to 30, 18 to 29, 18 to 30, yeah. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
I was just gonna bring that up, because I wanted to see how many in this room are between the ages of 18 and 28. Raise your hand. No, I'm serious, because when you think about it, what do we do to reach out to that age group? And, we have to start reaching out, no matter whether you're Tea Party, Libertarian, or Republican Party, because that is a generation that's voting, and yes, they came out the roads.
And they're the future of the country. And let me just do a quick commercial. My organization has now a youth department called Youth Taking a Stand. On November 19th, we're having our first youth conference. It's a virtual conference, and we're inviting young people from all over the country to join in. And we've got a young executive committee of kids who are running it and are going to be speaking to these young people. Look, I could not agree with you more, but this is why, folks, I really believe this is also a spiritual issue, because this is like a cancer that's metastasized. And you know, the doctor can't say, oh, I'll just cut out this little part here. No, it's in the whole body. You need something that is going to kill it in the entire body. And we don't have anything like that. We've got to raise up a new generation, but we really have to ask God to help us in this country to wake people up, because I really have likened this to a cult.
Yep.
It is like the left is now a cult. And whatever they believe, no matter how crazy it is, you are expected to go along with it. And if you don't, you get punished. You could lose your job. You could have your business come under attack. You could have your reputation lost when they start attacking you for all kinds of stuff and just making stuff up about you, which is when I ran, that's what they did about me. They went all the way to my hometown of Chesapeake, Pennsylvania, which I grew up in a foster home that didn't have an indoor bathroom. And they went down there and did a quote unquote investigation to find out whether it was true that I didn't have an indoor bathroom. Because they wanted to prove that I was somehow embellishing my resume to say I took a bath in a galvanized tub on Saturday nights. Now, who makes that up? But it just goes to show where their heads are. If you get in the way, you've got to be destroyed, because after all, you violated the cult. So
whiskey. It's a Maoist cultural revolution.
we are in the middle of it. Yes, sir.
When I looked at some of the places you think of that stayed Democrat after all the riots, after all the crime. Now, New York, yeah, Zeldin did a pretty good job coming close, but it wasn't going to happen probably, you know. Did get a few seats up there Republican, which helped on Long Island. But with all the crime, all the riots, all this defund the police movement, all these states that had the most of it stayed with it. You know, Michigan, Wisconsin, Minnesota, the West Coast. Now, got 2 years. They voted for the same thing to continue, right? So let's see what happens in 2 years of the same thing continuing. It's been 2 years now. Let's see what happens after 4. Maybe enough people will finally go, yeah, this is Kool-Aid we're drinking, but I don't know.
Well, if you take a look at the age of the people that are robbing these stores, they're not young people, they're not old people.
I know.
They're young. So they're the ones going out to vote as well.
Mr. Jackson?
And then PD had a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Golly, I was just going to add to the indoctrination from the schools, and I'm from Pennsylvania as well. So many of my friends have kids who went to the Penn State, to the University of Pennsylvania, and they're the helicopter parents. We all remember the helicopter parents who think their children could do no wrong. So they come home from these indoctrined schools, and bam, all of a sudden, their kids are now lawyers, doctors, and Indian chiefs who know it all, and the parents are saying, oh, well, look, he's a trans. I mean, I'm like, what does that even mean, he's a trans? Well, he's transitioning into a woman. I'm like, really? I go to weddings, I'm lost. It's exponential
It is.
at this point.
Because that's cool now.
Right.
You know, it's cool to transition.
Oh, heaven forbid we make our children mad.
Right, exactly. Or disagree with them.
Right.
Because if you disagree with them about something, you hate them. So, but look, I think that's what I mean. You got the corporate world then, because most of the people who are in leadership there have been indoctrinated in these same places, and you've got Blackstone that is now sort of forcing corporations to conform to all this woke business. You got the military trying to indoctrinate our young people. So the cultural situation is driving the politics. And so that's why I say we really need divine intervention. We got to keep fighting, but we really need divine intervention because this situation has metastasized into a pretty deadly circumstance. Yes, sir.
Mr. Jackson, Don Roby, I'm actually the treasurer for the Hampton Sea Party. I'm also a small business owner.
Okay.
Okay. One of the things I have noticed over the last probably 15 to 20 years is more and more people is getting on government subsidies. Why would people vote against the hands that's going to feed them? Why bite that hand? I think the last statistic I saw come out probably right before the election cycle was over 40% of Americans is on some type of government benefit. The only way we're ever going to change that is to encourage people to get out back into the workforce, but also within our school systems itself. And that's probably teaching kids, not everybody needs to go to college.
Right, right.
Why not look at the trades? Because there's a lot more trades out there that you don't have to spend $120,000 on for underwater basket weaving with gender studies of the Middle Age century to go out there and then turn around and spend $600 a month in tuition, where you could go, say, carpentry school, brick masons, electrical, music, lighting, whatever, and then you come out 2 years later, you're making $70,000, $80,000 a year. 4 years after that, you're pulling six figures a year.
Look, I couldn't agree with you more. You realize, though, what you're talking about is helping someone to become independent.
Oh, I'm sorry, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
Society is touching people to be dependent.
Right.
Gotcha.
See, and let's face it, the left doesn't want people independent. They don't want people to be able to earn a living. They want you dependent because then they've got you. It's because then they've got the control.
Friends of brave.
Good, Dean.
Bishop, and I've been to your church before, and I've listened to your nationwide podcast and that. And I go back to the same thing. I think the decline and erosion of morality in this nation is directly responsive as coming from the churches. I don't care what church it is, I don't what denomination, it doesn't matter. They are so content with patronizing the congregation, the happy clappy, everything's fine, everything in the world. But I don't see that in your church, and I didn't see that when Jesus went to the temple and overturned the tables. He was political. Anybody
And
says
Robert
he's not.
was there.
That's terrible.
And Mrs. Jackson, unlike your husband, you do not look like a grandmother.
They don't look like a grandmother either. No transition there.
But, and I've talked to you about this so many times, and what is wrong with the churches in this country to recognize and tell the people what's wrong? They're just sitting up there, standing up there.
Well, look, let me, I'll try to be quick about this. First of all, there are some good churches out there, and I get to speak at many of them where pastors are doing it. Remember, George Barna says that 75% of the churches in America no longer teach the Bible, and that of that 25%, only 10% of those are actually willing to apply it to the issues of the day. And you ask why. I would say it's two things: money, membership, and cowardice. That, you know, I've got too much money coming in, I got a big mortgage, some of my members might not like it, and I'm not gonna get into that. And I've had people come to me and say, well, I went to my pastor and said, are you gonna speak to this issue of life? Oh, I'm not touching that with a 10-foot pole, and be told in no uncertain terms, I am not speaking out on any of that. That's not what I'm here to do. So unfortunately, the Revolutionary era church that was willing to speak out on liberty and speak out on the issues of the day and to denounce King George, sadly, that's gone. Yes.
I just want to say on the education part that when you're teaching the Constitution, that idea that your creator is responsible for liberty, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, the government is not. And when you don't teach that, and you take God out of it, then they look at government.
And substitute government.
No question. Yes, ma'am, you've been waiting for a while.
It's okay. What would you say to the Republican Party about getting organized on the issues, on the candidates? Because it seems that there's different things all over and nothing is being done.
You know, look, politicians suffer from the same cowardice that pastors do. Because I had an issue with Ronna McDaniel. Now, we got all these problems in the schools, right? I mean, all over the country, they're bringing this transgender stuff in the schools. You know, she sent out a memo in June saying we all have to celebrate LGBTQ month. And I'm thinking, yes, she did. I'm like, what? I mean, your own constituency is having trouble with these people all over the country. And that's the group, frankly, that's the activist group that is responsible for all this. And you want us to celebrate it? I mean, here again, it's not a matter of hatred, but my goodness gracious, show us that you're on our side. And I think these are the folks, frankly, who are so milquetoast that they just don't galvanize the American. They don't galvanize conservatives. They don't have people saying, as I have to tell people, Rush Limbaugh didn't create the conservative movement. The conservative movement created him.
Yeah.
Because there were people all over the country when he began to speak saying, yeah, exactly, that's what I think. And Republicans rarely give people a reason to feel that way because they're so busy trying to duck and dodge and not appear quote unquote extremists that you know, I mean, their ultimate, Jesus said, because you're neither hot nor cold, I'll spew you out of my mouth. And that's about where Republicans are, ready to be spit out in some way, the Republican elites anyway. Yes, ma'am.
Would you ever consider, you know, maybe talking to a couple of the party chairs and stuff with a few people to try to see where they're at and try to get them to move a little bit more into standing up instead of, you know, kneeling about all the issues?
You know, I would. In fact, I've thought about doing that right here in Virginia because I haven't had much of a relationship with our new party chair, and I feel like I should talk to him because he has no idea what I'm doing and doesn't seem to be interested in trying to coordinate or cooperate and so I thought I'd have a talk with him. But I'm glad you brought that up.
State level or local?
I'm talking about state level. But I'd be willing to do it locally as well. But I'm glad you brought it up because I travel a lot. And one of the things I've been thinking about adding to my itinerary when I travel is to try to meet with the head of the Republican Party in whatever area I'm going into.
I'd take off work for that because I would sit there and help you and say, here's I can tell you who does what. Trust me, they know me. So that. Because there's nothing worse than what I'm seeing is everything we kind of want to hide. We don't want to stand for anything. And I'm going, if I can't trust you to stand before the election, what are you going to do after?
Nothing. That's it.
And
Exactly.
especially if I stand for something, are you going to stand behind me and hide behind me? Or are you going to stand with me? Or are you just going to sit down because all that matters is your political career?
You know, Ronald Reagan used to say, beware those people who run for office because they want to be somebody as opposed to wanting to do something. Ronald Reagan was a mission candidate. He had ideas that he wanted to see implemented, but a lot of these people, they want the office, they want the title. They're not interested in getting out there and getting their hands dirty trying to make things happen. So, you know, partly we've got to do a better job of choosing some of these candidates that are put forward, don't we?
That's true. Yeah. Convention of States, what do you think of that? I mean, people are putting you know, like, one of the bills that they have in there is to do a convention of states.
Yeah, well, I have friends who support it. I'll tell you why I have not jumped on that bandwagon. I was at an event one time, a bunch of conservatives sitting around, and the issue came up. And I hadn't taken a stand at that point, it was still fairly new. But they almost degenerated into a fight. It was that ugly over Convention of the States. I thought to myself, man, if this is the answer and you end up fighting with one another over it, I don't know how in the world we're going to make any progress because we've got so much to fight with these leftists about. So, and I'm not trying to be cute about this, but it's just something as a result I've kind of watched from a distance rather than jumping into it. It's almost 8 o'clock. I'm supposed to be done at 8?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, you haven't asked the question. You've been trying to get through.
I was just going to make a statement that I used to think, because I'm an adjunct faculty at a community college.
Okay.
And I used to think, when all of this started coming about, that we were safe at the community colleges from this indoctrination.